now we will very briefly consider the process of canonization of saints in the Catholic Church. We should acknowledge, first of all, that everyone who is in heaven with God is a saint. When you get to heaven, you're going to be St. John, St. Elizabeth, St. Stephen, St. Anne, St. somebody, whatever your name is, you're going to be a saint. Doesn't mean you're going to get your own feast day on the calendar like the big saints we all know about. These are the canonized saints. These are people whose lives have been examined by the Church and found to be heroically virtuous and worthy of being held up as models of holiness to the rest of us. But our goal, all of our goal, is one day to find ourselves in heaven right there beside them. As John Paul II said, "Do not be afraid to be saints. Follow Jesus Christ, who is the source of freedom and light. Be open to the Lord, so that He may lighten all your ways." This is a very brief overview of the history of how people get to be called Saint so-and-so publicly in the Catholic Church. In the very beginning, it was simply the vox populi, or the voice of the people, or what we call spontaneous local attribution. I mean, people generally know when somebody among them is particularly holy, particularly worthy of veneration, and this popular acclaim, particularly for martyrs, developed into certain persons, certain Christians who had died, being particularly honored and looked up to and prayed to in their local communities. The first formal group to deal with these issues was instituted in 1588 by Pope Sixtus V, and it was called the Congregation of Rites. Even before that, in the year 993, Pope John XV had declared Ulrich of Augsburg a saint. And this is the first saint that we're aware of that was publicly recognized in this way by the Pope. In 1634, Pope Urban VIII required that the Vatican be involved in all causes of sainthood, trying to get a little more control over who was being held up in this way to the rest of us. What came to be called in more recent years the Congregation for the Causes of Saints by the work of Pope Paul VI in 1969 and Pope John Paul II in 1983, they both revised this congregation that was originally set up centuries ago and also renamed it. And this is what it's called today, and this is the group that works on formal canonizations of people. There are three major stages involved in this process, which could take anywhere from maybe 5 or 10 years to many, many more years, depending on how it's going. Stage 1 is the longest stage, usually, and it involves an examination of the life of a candidate who has been proposed for sainthood, canonized sainthood. And this stage has two major phases. The first takes place at the diocesan level, who then sends the results of their investigation to Rome for phase 2, where it is handled by the Congregation for the Causes of Saints. People that come through this phase successfully are called venerable. Stage 2 leads to beatification, when the candidate becomes blessed so-and-so, and finally stage 3, which is canonization, when they are formally called saint, and then they get their own official feast day. So briefly, what happens in stage 1, phase 1 in the diocese? Well, first of all, this phase doesn't usually start until at least 5 years after the person has died, although this period of time can be waived by the Pope if he determines that it's a good idea. The reason for requiring a wait is simply to let the emotional level die down, to see that, after the initial flush of emotion when a very well-regarded person dies, are people still interested in this person being honored by canonization? At this point, the bishop of the diocese is in charge of the proceedings. The action is initiated by someone called a petitioner. This could either be an individual person, even the bishop himself, or it could be a group of people, for example, an order of nuns or priests who would like their founder to be recognized as a canonized saint. The procedures are directly overseen by someone who is called a postulator. And this stage requires, before it goes very far, what's called a nihil obstat from the Vatican, stating that there's enough evidence that the cause should proceed and they should continue to work on it. A tribunal is formed within the diocese, and this group examines the life and the writings of the person under consideration. If they are someone who has done a lot of writing, then it takes a lot more time. The specific virtues that are considered to have been present in this person's life at a heroic level are determined, because that's part of what goes into their worthiness to be honored as a saint. If it's a relatively recent person, there are still people alive who knew them, then they will interview those people and find out what they have to say about the person. The opinions of other bishops and even of the general public are solicited. The church does not ignore the voice of the people even today. It's not the determining factor, but it's an important factor. So, do people really, do they look up to this person? Are they already inclined to pray and ask this person to pray for them, and so on and so forth? And then everything is put together, compiled, and the documentation proving either that they are a martyr, someone who died for the faith, or a person of heroic virtue is sent to Rome for the next stage. The next phase of stage 1. So phase 2 of stage 1, they receive all the documentation that was compiled by the diocese at the Congregation for the Causes of the Saints. And a new postulator that's in Rome is appointed to work at this, to oversee the actions in this phase. They prepare what is called a positio. And this is a summary. It's a summary of all the documentation that was prepared at the diocese and handed on to Rome. And the person who is directing the compilation of this summary is called a relator. After this is prepared, it's passed on to a board of 9 theologians who vote on the suitability of the candidate. And if it's approved at that stage, it's handed on to the bishops and cardinals that compose the congregation, and then they vote. A formal decree is prepared, and the prefect of the congregation, the head of the congregation, passes it on to the Pope, who, if he approves the public reading of a formal decree declaring that this person may be called venerable or a servant of God. The next stage, not a lot happens as far as, documentation and documents being prepared and written and approved. What is needed for a person to go through and be beatified, be called by the title blessed, is a miracle that is attributed to his or her intercession. And what this means is people will pray for a particular person at this phase, to pray to God, to intercede with God for them on behalf of some particular physical event, usually, because those are the most easy ones to verify. We define a miracle as an event that can be witnessed by the senses, something that you can perceive, but it is in apparent contradiction to the laws of nature. The Church recognizes authentic miracles as a divine intervention in the sensible world. Something happens that, according to everything we know about the laws of nature, simply can't happen on its own. We attribute this to the action of God in the world. This miracle involved in the beatification of a person must be attributed to his intercession, his or her, and there are rules for this. There are specific rules that you must pray only to this person for their intercession, and it has to be verified by an appropriate group. For example, if it's a medical miracle, it has to be attested by medical personnel that this person did have this condition, it was spontaneously cured, and there's no way that this could have happened naturally. The miracle must occur after the death of the person being considered for beatification. If the person is verified to have died for the faith and therefore is a martyr, a miracle is not required for them to be called blessed. Once a decree of verification of the miracle is presented to the Pope and approved, he allows what is called limited public veneration. It's still not a person to be honored necessarily by the universal church, but usually in a diocese, region, or religious community in which this person lived. And the candidate is now called blessed so-and-so. Final stage, canonization. Once again, there's not a heck of a lot of documentation or anything to go on. What we are waiting for is a second miracle, or if for a martyr, the only miracle. This miracle has to be attributed to the intercession of the blessed person, and it must occur after their beatification. Once this occurs, goes through the procedures, is verified by doctors or whatever type of scientific verification is needed, the person is then declared and canonized as a saint. And public veneration in the universal church is then encouraged and required. They're added to the calendar of the saints, the long list of saints, and they are officially a saint of the church. Now none of this affects the person who has died, the person who is canonized and beatified, and so on and so forth. They're in heaven. We have saints not for their sake, but for ours, to see what holiness another human person is actually capable of. However, as we said at the beginning, we are all called to be saints. We become saints by living our daily lives in the best way we know how. And when we make mistakes, when we err, when we make bad choices, we repent, we confess, we are forgiven, and we go on. As Father Barron states in the Catholicism series, the holiness of God is like a white light, pure, simple, complete. But when that light shines, as it were, through the prisms of individual human lives, it breaks into an infinite variety of colors. The Church revels in the variety of its saints because it needs such diversity to represent, with even relative adequacy, the infinite intensity of God's goodness.